in progress. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. It was a beautiful performance that is helping us transition to the most amazing program that we have for today. So we'll give it just one more minute and we'll bring you back around noontime, David, okay? Okay, good morning. One more minute and we'll be ready to start. Okay. Good morning. My name is Carmen Bracamonte, and I am the founder of Next Wave Founders, a nonprofit organization that focuses on economic mobility. I am also the founder of the project Co-Creation Nation, that is actually the one that is moving an ecosystem across rural America to bring technology and innovation to marginalized areas. I am really excited to announce this morning that we are launching a cohort to support nonprofit organizations that are interested in aligning with the President Biden's 9-point plan to combat the Omicron variant. We are specifically focusing on one of the points regarding a rapid response. And we are interested in identifying nonprofit organizations that are working in rural communities to implement in-home vaccination visits and expand coordinated services with rural transit authorities and ride-sharing opportunities with local community members, and also to expand the medical reserve corps efforts in rural communities. Please be aware that we are going to be launching this cohort with an announcement this Monday, December the 6th, around 5 p.m. And I'll put in the chat the link that you can use to follow up the announcement, as well as the instructions to apply. 10 non-for-profits will be identified to receive a grant of $2,500 to receive support, one-on-one grant writing support in these specific areas that I just mentioned. Okay, and with that said, I wanted to bring you into the presentation today. I would like to start by thanking our community partners, Sally Kane, Executive Director of National Federation of Public Broadcasters, as well as Melissa Begay. She is the director in the Native Public Media Organization that have been able to help us with the coordination of this event and helping us reach Indian country, which is one of the communities that we are looking forward to assist with this cohort. With no further ado, I would like to introduce you to our wonderful speaker this morning, Professor Jill Sonke, who is the director of the Center for Arts in Medicine at the University of Florida and is currently serving as senior advisor to the CDC Vaccine Confidence and Demand Team on the COVID-19 Vaccine Confidence Task Force. She is a dancer and a musician, and also an affiliated faculty member in the UF School of Theater and Dance, Norman Fiksel Institute of for Neurological Diseases, the Center for African Studies, the STEM Translational Communication Center, and the One Health Center. Jill serves on the editorial board for Arts and Health Journal as a consulting editor for Health Promotional Practice Journal. She is also the director of the AP Arts Lab, a national endowment for the Arts Research Lab at University of Florida, and the National Initiative, Creating Health Communities, Arts plus Public Health in America, with 27 plus years of experience and leadership in arts, in health. Jill is active in research, teaching, and cultural exchange. Her current research focuses on the arts in health communication, the arts in public health, and the effects of music on cause and quality of care in emergency medicine. In addition to her wonderful background, I want to say that Jill is not only an amazing, qualified professional, she is a wonderful human being, generous as you can never believe, and an amazing supporter of our cause. So with no further ado, Jill, welcome and thank you for doing this amazing webinar for us.
Thank you, Luisa. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here. I'm just a huge fan of the work that you're doing and the work that you're all doing. Let's see, Luisa, I wonder, Hector, I don't know if you're able to hear. We've got a lot of background noise.
I'm gonna mute.
Hector. Hector Peña.
Can you please? Oh my goodness. Okay, and mute all. Okay, I'm gonna mute all participants.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Luisa.
Sure, my pleasure. I apologize for that.
Not at all. Thank you. And thank you, Sally, for the support, and David for the beautiful music, making all the points that I want to make today. So that was such an important beginning for us. And thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces this morning as well. So I am just want to start by noting my name is Jill Sonke. You can please call me Jill as we drop into dialogue. I use she, her pronouns. I'm really pleased to be joining you today from New York City, which is the land of the Lenape people. And I want to honor and acknowledge the ownership of the land and the Lenape people as well before we begin. This workshop, this time that we have together, will be very participatory. So I want to invite you to keep your camera on if that's comfortable for you or helpful for you, and to drop any questions into the chat or to just chime in, use the raise hand function and ask questions as we go. I very much want to be in dialogue with you all. I want to note we're going to do an exercise in the middle of the workshop. So please, if you would have a pen and pencil, or a pencil or pen and paper available, or a document on your laptop or another device that you can do a bit of writing on. We're going to do a bit of writing together this morning. So I'm going to dive in. I'm going to take just a second to switch my background and get my slides up. All right. Oops, somehow we started, sorry, at the end of the slides rather than at the beginning. Just switch that. Okay, now you should all be seeing the slides. My goal today is to share with you a love of grant writing and to encourage you to approach grant writing maybe in a different way than you've thought about it to date. As Luisa and I were in conversation, we recognize that grant writing can often be a barrier to really good work that is ready to happen in communities. And part of the reason that grant writing tends to be a barrier for people is that in my own experience, before I approached grant writing, I thought of it like doing my taxes or something that I just dreaded. I associated it with complex governmental forms that were created and written in languages that I felt outside of and couldn't understand easily and just didn't want to be a part of. I also felt that it was a system of judgment. You know, the scoring and things that go along with grant writing can be really off-putting. They were for me. So I found that I got very nervous around grant writing. And when I thought about grant writing or approached it, I frankly just didn't feel well physically. So it was really challenging for me to engage in grant writing. But the first time I did, and I did so in partnership with a very dear colleague, Dr. John Graham Pohl, who is the founder of our arts and medicine program at UF Health Shands Hospital. John very kindly mentored me in this process, and John is a poet and a doctor. And so I was very fortunate to learn about grant writing through the lens of a clinical style of grant writing and a scientific style of grant writing and an artistic style of grant writing. And I've really embraced the artistic style of grant writing. And that's what I am hoping to convey to you in our time together today. So I'm not going to teach you the technical components of grant writing. There are lots of resources available for that. And a lot of grant writing is just about clear writing. And so that's a skill that we develop through practice. What I am going to do today is convey some of my experiences of grant writing with you from the perspective of grant writing and grant reviewing. And I'm going to share with you how I organize myself toward grant writing and within grant writing. And that for me is a really primary way in which I can love grant writing and I can approach it as an artist. So again, I'm going to share those approaches with you more than the technical parts of grant writing, but we are going to practice some skills today as well. So let's dive in. So again, I've sort of covered this preamble a little bit. So as you get into grant writing, you have to think about, where do we start? There are a lot of places that you can start, but typically we start by looking for grants and jumping in. But I think preliminary steps are, as I've covered already, adjusting your attitude toward grant writing, shifting from that, this is a governmental form, this is a judgmental process, to this is a creative act. And it's important in that process to remember the relationship between grantors and grantees. Grantors need you. Funders are individuals and organizations who have the mission and the responsibility to give money and to give money to achieve particular goals. So grantors and funding agencies have stated missions and objectives and strategic plans and objectives that they are accountable to their boards and to governmental entities to achieve. And so they're looking for actors. They're looking for programming to fulfill their mission and their goals. So they need you. They're shopping for you as much as you're shopping for them. So I come from the Midwest, and I was raised to feel that one never asks for money. I mean, not even talk about money, let alone asking for it. So it was really difficult for me to enter this space of asking for money. Very uncomfortable for me. So it's really important for me to remember that funders are looking for us. They need us to achieve their mission. So we are in service to our funders when we ask for those funds. So that's one attitude adjustment that has been very important to me. Another one, as I've referred to already, and is my main point today, grant writing is a creative act. It is storytelling. In writing a grant, you are telling your story, and your objective is to engage your audience, the reviewers, in your story so that they can share in your values, your objectives, your mission, your core beliefs, and your strategy, and join you in achieving your goals. It's also a performance. I'm going to talk a lot today about my experience of being a grant reviewer. And I'll just say, I've lost track of how many grants I've written, but it's probably over 350 at this point, if not closer to 400. And I think the financial tallies are over 4 million in the amount of yield from grants that I've written. And I've reviewed grants for foundations, for federal agencies, for small granting agencies. I've reviewed all sorts of grants. And I will say that I've learned so much about grant writing from grant reviewing. So if you ever have that opportunity, I highly recommend it. The process of reviewing a grant also informs for me so much about how I write a grant. And I'm going to share a lot of with that about you today. And in that process, I have come to think of grant reviewers, my readers, as my audience. And I think of grant writing as designing a performance and an experience. I was a choreographer for many years, and I thought about my audience when I was choreographing. I thought about their experience, and I do so when I'm writing grants as well. I think about what the intellectual experience will be, the emotional experience, and the embodied experience. So I'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. And it's also really important to remember that you are the best person to share your story and your vision. A lot of people think about hiring grant writers. Can happen. There are roles for grant writers, but you really are the best person to tell your story. So if you can get yourself into grant writing mode, you're going to be the most successful at it. So first thing I do is get comfortable. So I usually write grants at home and not in the office. So find a comfy chair. I set myself up with all the things I love, like chocolate and tea, music, if you like to use music in the background. And then after that, I think about setting up conditions in which I can be most creative. So for me, that includes things like integrating creative breaks, just like I would set myself up to choreograph. I set myself up to write a grant. What do I need to do before that? Take a walk outside, work out, play some music, have a good meal. However, you get into your creative space. I would recommend setting yourself up in that way. It's also important that you're well slept, relaxed, well fed, that you take breaks, that you just set yourself up for success in the way that you do for other things. Then let's go into a few technical things here. Searching for grants. There's lots of ways to find grant opportunities. Mostly we do so through online databases. There are quite a few that are free. There are quite a few that are paid. If you're affiliated with an organization, you'll have better access to paid ones. Also, your city or county governments may have subscriptions to these online databases that are designed to be used by community members. So look to those sorts of organizations in your Chamber of Commerce, your local libraries, local university, if you have one, local hospital. Those organizations may have subscriptions that they would be happy for you to utilize. I like web searching too, and this is kind of fun detective work. I look for programs like mine, and I look to see who's funding those programs, and that leads me to funders. So that kind of detective work around similar programs is really fun and useful for me. There's also grant news, grants newsletters like Philanthropy Digest that can be really helpful. And again, if you're affiliated with an organization, you may have people whose jobs it is to help you get grants, universities, schools, hospitals. Again, those sorts of organizations have development departments or fundraising departments that you can look to for assistance. So there's all kinds of grants, local corporate grants. So if you've got like a Target or a Walmart or a supermarket chain or an AT&T in your community, those corporate entities will have tax obligations to give a portion of their proceeds. And so they'll have granting programs. Some of them are really easy, as simple as a letter, and some have applications of varying scales. Local philanthropic organizations like Rotary Club, Lions Club, Kiwanis Club, women's medical guilds, those sorts of local clubs and philanthropies are often giving money. You will likely have a local arts council, either city or county in your area, and certainly you have a state arts council or state arts agency as well. And then there's bigger family and corporate foundations, foundations like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Knight Foundation, Doris Duke, those sorts of big foundations are more accessible than you think they may be. So it's really worth searching for those as well in terms of your project. And then of course, government grants, those span from local to state to federal. And I will say around those, I was terrified and really intimidated, but they have become much more approachable. The granting world is changing today. Granting agencies are recognizing that they need to remove the barriers and the hoops to getting grants in order for money to get where it needs to be. So we're seeing major changes in the grant application and administration and reporting processes, making many of these bigger grants much more accessible than they've been in the past. So again, my message here is don't be afraid, don't be intimidated. These funders are looking for you and the great work that you're doing. So it is important to know this grants landscape. I mentioned Philanthropy Digest. That and other philanthropy news can be really helpful. Granting agencies like Grant Makers in Health and Grant Makers in the Arts are also helpful to follow. Even as a non-funder, you can get on their mailing lists and follow their news, and that's really, really helpful and important. These are just a few grants databases that you can use. Grants.gov is for government grants. The foundation centers, foundations directory online. eCivis is a search agent that I love. Grants Select, these cost money, but again, your Chamber of Commerce or city or county governments may have subscriptions designed for you to use. So I encourage you to look in those directions as well. So super important as you get going that you again remember that reciprocal relationship and look for compatible funding opportunities. We think of mission fit or objectives fit. So I would look at a grant opportunity, look at their mission, their goals, their objectives, and see how well they align with yours. And here's one golden rule, two golden rules of grant writing. Don't squeeze your project into a shape it doesn't fit in easily, and find the grant to fit your project. Don't make a project to fit a grant. It's easy to see an opportunity come your way and go, oh, I could do something like that and come up with a project. Maybe in some instances that could be good, but generally that's not great organizationally. So look for that mission fit. That's critically important. Who are they looking for? And do you fit that profile? Look for geographic limitations, those, other hidden limitations that can be in the small print of grants. You don't want to get, 10 hours into writing a grant and then realize it's just only for, programs in Nebraska. Match requirements, that means many grants will have a match requirement, which means if they give you 10,000, they expect you to bring another 10,000 and spend another 10,000. So that's important to know about as well up front, to be sure that you have that match. Other exclusions are important to look for, weird things that can be in place. And deadline is so important. And this is something that I really want to underscore. When I first started writing grants, even when I started liking it, I would hear myself say to people, I'm just always nauseous for the whole week before a grant deadline, because I was so anxious. And it was true. I was so anxious about missing a deadline, the pressure of being up against a deadline. It was actually awful. I didn't sleep well. It was really, really hard. So I finally developed a sort of form of self-deception that worked really well for me. And that was moving the deadline in my head instantly up 10 days and believing that really fully. I mean, of course, subconsciously, I know that there's cushion there in the deadline, and that's why it works. But literally being fully committed to 10 days ahead of time being the actual deadline, it changed everything for me. I have to convince all of my staff and all my people around me to never say the real deadline, to only say our deadline. And then we completely orient ourselves toward that early deadline. And it feels so good to be early. And I can tell you as a grant reviewer, I'm really impressed with the applications that come in early. There's an advantage there right away in the process. So move your deadline up for your own well-being and for so many other reasons in terms of advantages of getting a grant in early. And here's a step that may surprise you, but I find to be critically important in the grant writing process. And this is clarifying your proposal for yourself. You'd be surprised at how often we think we've got an idea, we think, we see it clearly, we feel we see it clearly, we're ready to go for a grant. And then as we get into the writing process, if we're not 100% clear about what it is we want to do, all the details of it, as we write, that project can actually morph, right? And you'll have to start over and realign. So it's really important that for yourself, and really even before you start to look for grants, you've got a description that isn't written for the proposal, that's written for you. So write yourself a short project description, have it on your desktop, literally, or physically, or on your computer, and keep it there in your sights. And it can be helpful to develop that proposal for yourself using a structure called how might we, or a statement, how might we. So if you start with how might we, that's going to get you to articulate the change you want to make through your work, and then how you're going to make it. And we're going to talk more about these structures. You can also develop a simple logic model. We'll talk a little more about logic models today. And if you're proposing research, there's a kind of a standard structure called a specifics aim page that the NIH and other entities use in the United States that can be good, again, anchors for what it is you want to do. The logic model is sort of your map of what resources you need, what outcomes you intend to, and what outcomes you intend to achieve, and how, the methods you'll use. So look closely at eligibility again. Typically, you'll often, when you get into this process, there will be now an eligibility test. When I first started writing grants, you had to just write a whole full proposal for everybody. Now there's incremental steps in grant processes. The first is an eligibility quiz, where you usually online will just type in, are you a 501c3, which is a tax designation? Are you an individual? It'll kind of, what are you trying to do? And it'll kind of help determine your eligibility so you don't waste any more time. Then the next step is typically an LOI, which can stand for letter of intent or letter of interest. And it's just a short pitch. So it's a short letter or a form that you'll submit that again outlines what you want to do and why you want to do it and what you believe you'll achieve, or that specific same page. So you'll go into that next step. And then if the funder feels like you're a fit, they'll invite a full proposal. So we're going to spend some time today. We're actually going to practice this skill of this short pitch. And we're going to talk about a sort of organizational approach to writing a full proposal. So let's dive into LOI. And this is where I want you to get ready with your pen or pencil and paper or your document. Let's talk a little bit about what a letter of inquiry or interest or intent is. Often now it's a form. And so it's a fill in the blank kind of form where you'll answer questions, but often it's just a letter, a 2-page letter. So I like to practice the skill of writing a 1 to 2 page letter. And I believe that a letter of intent should include these ingredients and be structured in this way. So this is just my recommendation for how to write a clear letter of intent. So you want to say who you are. You want to make a statement that connects your mission to theirs. So establishing that mission fit from the start. You want to say what you're asking for right away, clearly and briefly. Then an impact statement, what it is that you believe you will impact. What's the problem or what's the need that you're going to be addressing? What's the rationale? And then your proposal. So a little more specifically about your proposal. Once you've got them into the why and the need, here's the what, and with a little more outline, and then restating your request, reiterating the impact, and thanking them for their consideration. So that's what I like to see in a 1 or 2 page letter of intent or letter of interest. So in that process, you definitely want to clearly convey what you intend to do, why it's important, and how you're going to do the work. Those are the 3 key elements in a letter of intent. So I want to practice this a little bit, and we don't have a whole lot of time this afternoon. We're about halfway through our time together. So I want to invite you just to take about 5 minutes. And this exercise is really intended to get you over the hump. This is like, you know, when artists or non-artists approach a blank canvas, there's this, how do I begin moment that's so hard. So I want to invite you to step into and move through that how do I begin moment. The idea is not that we'll complete something today, but that you will begin something. So I want you to take your document and just begin to write. And you can follow this outline, and there's a few prompts here to get you going. So I'm going to just give you about 5 minutes to work on this. Does anybody, before we begin, have any questions? Please unmute yourself or use the chat. Any questions before we begin? All right, so we're at 12 noon now. Let's take about 5 minutes, just start. And I want you to approach this with a, you know, put your pencil down or put your fingers on the keypad and don't stop for 5 minutes. Just write stuff. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to make sense. Just write stuff in response to this structure.
Jill,
Yes.
is it okay if we bring David in to accompany the exercise with his beautiful music?
Sure, we could do that. And then people could have the choice of whether to have their volume on or off or at what level. Yeah, but do make that choice for yourself. Yeah, thank you, Luisa.
Sure. Thank you, David. Going back to you, Jill, when you're ready.
Thank you, Luisa. We'll take just another 30 seconds or so just to wrap up your writing. Take a minute to add anything else you'd like to add. Okay, so I would like to invite any comments or sharing. Does anyone want to read a bit of what you wrote or any? I'd love to hear some reflections on that process. How was it just getting started? Did you get excited? What was that like for you? Just jump in, please, and unmute yourself as you do.
Hi, can people hear me okay?
Hi, Olivia. Yes.
Hi, Jill. I thought that process was really helpful. I was typing on the computer. I loved having, the slide as a guide to look at. The music I found really peaceful and really got me in this zone. I was able to write a whole paragraph, lots of typos, but I feel like I was really had all the tools and well equipped to like start this process.
Great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Olivia. Good. Thank you for sharing. Any other reflections? All right. Well, I hope that process was useful for everyone. Oh, Evan, would you like to add?
I would just echo that. Like, I find often the starting is the hardest part. And so the tool that you gave really made it accessible to get into that flow. And I could have carried on for probably like another half an hour. So thanks for that.
Good. Oh, I'm so glad. And I want to encourage you to come back to this maybe later in the day, especially if you've got a real project that you're interested in getting funded. Any other reflections? Thank you, Evan and Olivia. All right. Thank you, everybody. That's great. I hope you will carry this process forward. Good. Let's carry on then. So I'm just going to go over some elements and I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because I want to take some time for reflection and dialogue. But I just want to walk through again how I organize myself to write a full proposal. And this sort of list that I'm going to go over with you comes hard learned, I think. It comes through years of not organizing myself well, and also just noticing the ways in which when I do organize myself in these ways, it just makes the process so much easier and so much more enjoyable and so much more fruitful. So in this process, just to note that you'll likely be working with an online form, you may be working with a PDF form as well, or just a list of guidelines and questions that you have to create a document around. So the format can be really varied. Often you'll create just a text document that you'll make into a PDF. You also may have an opportunity, and this is happening more and more, funders are inviting more creativity in the format in which proposals are coming to them. You might create a designed booklet as your proposal, or a multimedia proposal like a video, a narrative. All of these elements are becoming more common in grant proposals. So it's not always just a black and white form these days. And when you have the opportunity, I would encourage you to lean into any creative formats that you can provide to a funder. So here we go, organizing yourself. First, again, I want to go back to the importance of defining your project clearly, using a logic model for yourself. And here's where I'm going to begin to reflect on my experience as a grant reviewer. So I will say that as a grant reviewer, funders are getting kinder. I used to at times review commonly a batch of 60 grants, sometimes over 100 grants. And typically reviewers are often not paid. Sometimes stipends are provided. In some instances, reviewers are employed, but typically reviewers are volunteer a lot of the time. So as a human being, volunteering my time or giving a lot of time for a stipend, and in less cases, being fully paid to review, it's a lot. I am giving a lot of my time and energy. And as is the case for all of us, my time and energy is really precious. And I notice, and I'm going to speak from a very human perspective here, that in reviewing, whether I'm reviewing 15 grants or 65 grants, when I'm giving my time to this process and I approach a proposal that's not clear, which means I have to reread paragraphs or go back and refer to something, or I'm just puzzling over it, I'm working hard, I simply don't like you very much, right? As a proposal, and I don't mean that personally, but as a proposal, I just don't like you very much, and you're at a disadvantage, even if your work is phenomenal. If I have to work really hard to figure out how important your work is, you're at a real disadvantage. It's not about how well you write. I just want to underscore that. I can move through writing of all styles. It's about how clearly you express your vision and how clearly you tell me your story. So, again, it's not about being the best writer, but if I have to reread and backtrack and struggle, I simply don't like you. So the beginning of your work is to know yourself very clearly what it is you want to do so that you can tell me that story very clearly. So I recommend you tell your story to 15 of your friends and family members before you start the grant, that you write it clearly for yourself, either again as a short narrative, a set of bullet points, or better yet, a logic model. Lots of examples of logic models. Just Google logic models and you'll see lots and lots of examples. So again, I'm not going to teach you that skill today, but want to underscore the usefulness of that tool. But defining your project clearly is the number one skill. And I'm going to come back to my experience as a reviewer as we move through this list. So again, underscoring fitting the grant to your project, not the project to fit the grant. I can feel that as a reviewer when you're stretching to fit your work into my guidelines. So make sure it's a good, clear fit. Don't waste your time. Don't waste my time. If it's not a good, clear fit, choose the right grant. Another thing is to read the guidelines really carefully. You need time for this. Read them again. And read them again. I can't tell you how many times I haven't read the guidelines enough. I'm writing. At a point before I submit, I go back, I reread the guidelines to make sure I've dotted my I's. And I'm like, oh, I forgot that, so you've really got to know your guidelines. Worthwhile time investment on the front end to read your guidelines several times. And I've learned to highlight the things that surprise me. It's not like, often when we highlight when we're reading a book, we highlight the important things. In this process, I highlight the things that surprise me, are illogical to me, and that I might be most likely to forget. So that's a very different approach that I bring here. And do register. There's often registrations and things that you need to take care of online that can trip you up later in the process, which is why I put this here early on. So I'm going to take just a minute to give you a little bit of an overview of clarifying goals, objectives, methods. This is a skill that's important for grant writing. We're not going to dig deep, but I want to expose it to you today so that you understand that this is an important part of being clear about what it is you're going to be doing, because grants will often ask you to break your plan down into goals, objectives, and methods. So the ability to organize there is really important. So again, just very quickly, goals are broad, issue-oriented, they're long-term ends. They do not have to be immediately measurable within the frame of the project you're proposing. They reflect your mission. They are the greater good, the greater change that you seek to achieve. So in the case, I put a couple examples from one grant here: to reduce loneliness among older adults in a particular county. That's the ultimate goal of the project that we're proposing, to reduce loneliness. So your objectives are how you're going to do that in the, if we think of a building analogy, in the framework of the building, how are you going to do that? So the basic structure of the proposal in this case is to establish workshops. We're going to create arts workshops for older adults in this county. So objectives do need to be specific, concrete, measurable, outcome-oriented. They reflect your goal. I should be able to see as a reviewer clearly how the objective is going to help meet the goal, and they target very specific actions. I do want to note, often we hear about SMART goals. Don't think about that here. Goals, actually, SMART goals refer more to objectives. It's unfortunate that they've been called goals, and I think people are leaning on them less these days for that reason. But don't be confused with SMART goals in this grant writing realm. I find it to be confusing. Your methods are the exact what, who, what, where, when. This is where, I want to see exactly what you're doing, detailed, but brief and clear, right? So again, I've expanded that narrative from the broad goal to the more specific objective to the really specific, exactly what we're going to do. 3 90-minute workshops for 300 unique adults, and then a full day festival. So that's the specific what of what we're going to do. So I hope you can see the distinctions between these 3 things. I often think of this in pyramid form, where the goal is overarching, the objectives begin to expand that out, and the methods expand that out further. Sometimes I think of it like this. One goal can have 2 objectives. A single objective can have 2 or 3 or 4 methods. The numbers of all these blocks would vary, but again, it can look like this in a structure. Excuse me. So a logic model, again, is super helpful for presenting your goals, objectives, and methods. And a theory of change is becoming a more popular thing. And I just toss it in here to, again, expose you to it, so you have an idea of what it is in case a funder is asking you for a theory of change, or in the case of your program, it might be a useful way to express your vision. So this is a theory of change that came out of a project that we recently were partnered with. And it's a beautiful theory of change that talks about how place-based arts and cultural strategies can amplify the drivers of social cohesion and build well-being at the community level. So a theory of change is often looking for the missing middle. It's the part of your proposal that is the mechanism, or the how or the why. You can recognize a problem and propose a solution, but what's that middle critical ingredient that often is the most important thing and hard to articulate? In the case of this theory of change, it's this relationship between social cohesion, place attachment, civic engagement, and mindset. So these are the active ingredients that I want to say, I'm really tracking these, and I'm going to use the relationship between these things as the way of getting from the problem or the need to the solution or the change. Okay, hope that makes a little bit of sense. Again, just wanted you to expose you to that structure and that idea. So coming back to writing your proposal, This is really important, using clear, concise, descriptive writing, not too dry, not too flowery. Again, thinking of your reader as your audience. You want to draw them in and be really clear and descriptive. One thing that I find important in a grant proposal is to not use words like amazing and incredible and excellent. And, I don't want to be told, I don't want to be given adjectives for how I should feel. I want from the actual information to feel those adjectives emerging in myself. I want to discover that your program is amazing and incredible and essential. So try to avoid those kinds of adjectives as you write. And again, I touched on this, considering your audience. There are a lot of elements to this beyond clarity that are really important. How you structure your proposal is really important. So what you will see often as a grant proposal is you get, let's say, 250 words or 1,000 characters to answer this question in a particular field or in a segment of your application. Do not seek to use every one of those characters or words. Exchange a lot of them for space on the page. Again, I want to come back to my experience of sitting in my comfy chair in the evening when I could be doing something else, reviewing a stack of 60 grants, which are sitting on my left. I pick one up, pick the next one up, I open it, and I am met with a dense page of words with no space. My heart goes, ugh, I just don't want to, right? As opposed to I open it up and, oh, there's a paragraph and there's some bullets and there's a picture and there's a diagram. And I'm like, oh, I'm eager. I'm eager. I can move through this, right? So that first impression of how a reader is met with a page or a proposal is incredibly important, because you've got a human who's reading a lot of these proposals. All right. So sacrifice words for space every time. Use bullets, tables, figures, images as much as possible to help the reader want to come with you in your proposal, as well as to be able to assimilate what you're communicating really easily. Okay. Answer all the questions and present your narrative clearly, because as a reviewer, I've got a rubric I've got to fill out. And if I have to search in your proposal in order to respond to a component of the rubric, again, I'm a little bit mad at you. I just don't like you, right? So, be kind to your reviewer. If you're given a structure, follow it exactly. Put the question as a header and then answer it, knowing that your reviewer has a rubric that's going to align with those questions or those components of the application. Also sacrifice, words for eye strain. I didn't even mention that specifically, but back to what I was talking about, delegate. Who on your team can find information for you, can help do parts. So definitely take a team approach to your grant writing. And editing is really, really important. Evan, you mentioned lots of typos. Of course. I really subscribe to the shitty first draft approach of writing, where you just, put pen to paper and write and then edit later. Again, that's very much, akin to creative processes, where you just create, you just, make your first draft, and then you come in to that revision process, which is a very much a part of the creative process. Also, just to underscore that point, take a second really quickly, read this sentence, and really quickly in the chat, note how many F's you see. Just really quickly, how many F's are in this? All right, so just pop it into the chat. How many F's? I see 2, 4, 4, 3, 2. Great, good work, guys. I will tell you, there are 6 F's in that sentence. And do you know why we only see 2, 3, or 4? Anybody know why? I'll come back to it. Which F's are we missing?
Scientific one.
Missed that one. Mostly we miss the F's in the ofs. And you know why? Because that's a word we write and read so often that we don't see it, even when we mean to. And the reason I bring that up is when we edit our own writing, we don't see our own mistakes because they're our normal, right? So it's really critically important that we get other people to edit our work. And so you want to get those people on board really easily or early in the process as well to help you. So here's a sort of sequential plan of attack here. And I apologize for using the word attack, which isn't very Zen, mean it to be energetic. So reading your guidelines, downloading your software, avoiding any of those technical glitches that could stress you out as you approach the deadline. Register, establish eligibility, request letters of support. Sometimes you have to have letters of support in your applications. And this is an opportunity to build relationships. This is something that people typically either do really well or really badly. And mostly people do it really badly. And we do it badly because we're busy. What tends to happen is that we wait and we ask people at the last minute for a letter of recommendation. And we ask people who are important, whose opinions, will be viewed to be important. They're often people who are important to us as organizations, partners, other funders, stakeholders. And when we ask them at the last minute to quickly write a letter for us, which is stressful for them, it reflects really badly on us and it weakens our relationship with them. In contrast, if we ask them early, give them a lot of time, give them all the information they need, and I speak again from a person who writes a lot of these letters for others, it is a pleasure to spend time reflecting on what I appreciate about a partner or another organization. It strengthens my regard because it heightens my awareness of what I appreciate about them. It strengthens our connection, and it's a relationship builder. So take time to request letters early, carefully, and appreciatively. It will pay off in your relationship. So schedule way ahead of time any signatures you may need from people who might happen to be on vacation or out sick the week that your grant is due. Locate demographic and other stats early. Again, that's something that can be good to delegate or partner around. Clarify policies, indirect costs, things like that. Those are cost requirements that apply often to organizations. Write your project description for yourself. Make your list of support materials if you need to provide them, start to get those things, and do the budgets. They can take you longer and they also will inform your proposal. So you'll notice that I go from writing that project description to doing the budgets without writing the narrative yet, right? We haven't yet written the narrative of the grant. Do your budget first, because as you think through the budget, it'll often change the way you've thought about your plans. You'll get more real about the resources you need and what you can and will do. So then write your narrative and format it, make it visually appealing, deal with word count in the ways that I've mentioned earlier. Put your support materials together, get your signatures, assemble your final copy, and file your notes. Make notes for your reasoning, especially around your budget. You may have to defend those reasons later, and it could be 6 months later when you don't actually remember. So I've learned the hard way to keep notes of my own rationales, especially around the budget. Again, from the perspective of the reviewer, create an experience and tell a story. I also draw on my experience as a parent of kids who went to Waldorf schools. In the Waldorf schools, they approach education with a sense of breath, with patterns and rhythms of breath throughout the day. They have the kids come in the morning and they're very quiet, and then they expand out and get energetic, and then they quiet back down to do a thing, and then they expand out. And so I often think about that as I write a grant and try to create create moments where I'm drawing my reader in, and then I'm exciting them, and then I'm drawing them into the detail, and then I'm connecting them to that vision again. So I try to think about that experience, the embodied, kinetic, and emotional and cognitive experiences that I'm providing for my reader, my audience, as I tell that story. Again, we talked about balancing lists and bullets with text. There's a right-left brain balance in that. If I'm asking my reader to come into a lot of research, minutia, and detail, I got to give them a break and let them come back out, to a broader vision or personal narratives or images. I often think of myself at this stage of the process doing work akin to a magazine or a newspaper editor, where you've got to consider the experience of the whole for your reader. So what is the rhythm? What is the pattern of that experience the journey that you're taking your reader through? Again, incorporating all of these elements as we've talked about, thinking in every way about the reader's experience, and designing, if you can, make it really pleasant. In that stack of 60 grants, I'm really attracted, to the ones that are just pretty, look good. Doesn't mean they're like overwhelming, right? And too exciting, but they're just, they bring an aesthetic that I appreciate. And that again reflects on the time that the grant writer has put in. When I see that you put time into a grant and care and love into a grant, I can assume that you're going to put time, care, and love into the work that you're going to do. So your grant is a reflection of your organizational capacity, of your personal values, and the way in which you do your work. If it feels like it was put together in the last minute, again, I recognize that, and it makes me, as the reviewer who is responsible for spending the funder's money, for determining where the best return on investment is going to be, all of these impressions make a difference. So submit it on time because you're 10 days ahead of the deadline. And huge important point, celebrate. Don't just close your laptop and walk away. Shout out to your friends and family that you just submitted a grant. Take yourself out to dinner, out to play, celebrate with your people, celebrate yourself, honor the effort that you put in, honor the accomplishment. We are human beings. Compensation matters. So really make time, take time to celebrate yourself. But that's not really it, that celebration. There's more to do. If you get the grant, I love this New Yorker cartoon from many years ago. Once you get the grant, there's a lot to do. And I've learned again the hard way, reread your submission and the guidelines, remind yourself of what you said you would do and do that. And if you need to make changes, communicate them to your funder and request those changes. Document what you do because you'll have to report. So document as you go. Also evaluate and refine as you go. Really important to be responsive, make changes, know that your grantor will appreciate your responsiveness. So you can make changes and request them as you need. And think about your relationship with the funder, steward it. Getting a grant is an opportunity to make a relationship with a funder. A lot of funders will stay with you over time. So how you develop your relationship to them is important. And of course, reporting on time is critically important. So all of that, I just hope you will do again and again and again, and that you will love grant writing and be productive and fruitful in it. So I'm going to stop sharing and invite some questions. Please unmute. I'd love to have a dialogue. So if you're comfortable turning your video on, unmuting yourself, I'd love to hear from you now. What are you thinking about? What can I explain a little better? Do you have questions or comments?
I would like to start, Jill. It is amazing information that really hits the core of changing the perception about grant writing. In my personal experience, I am new to the non-for-profit world. I started my organization emerging from this pandemic. It's been extremely busy for me, with a reduced staff and with a community of volunteers helping me to scale my ecosystem. And sometimes writing a grant has been extremely challenging because I tend to wait closer to the deadline and I feel the desperation. And I know now that is the worst place to start when you are, operating in that mode. With your guidance and your practices that you share with your students and your community of practice, I am learning to do this better, to take my time to really think about the purpose, the impact and the mission that I want to convey on my grant proposal. And ideas do not come on one single hour that I sit on my computer. They come along the way when I am sleeping or when I wake up one morning and I decide to take a walk around my neighborhood. That is how ideas start coming up. And the purpose of this webinar, introducing the cohort that we're gonna set up, is to help people ease the process of writing grants, because I'm sure that a lot of people attending today walk on my shoes as leaders of non-for-profit organizations.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Luisa.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. It was like you, I learned a lot of these things the hard way. Like, oh, I should do my budget earlier on because it'll change what I need to explain in my narrative and that kind of stuff. What was really valuable was changing my relationship to the process and really thinking about the fact that funders need us to help fulfill their mission, and to think about my reader like much as someone like myself, because I've also reviewed proposals before, but I generally don't keep that in the front of my mind when I'm writing them. So I really liked this this reframe, and I think that's going to be quite helpful for me. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, Evan. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, Ted Langdell, 94.3 KXYS, LPFM in Marysville, north of Sacramento. Rural area here, and this sounds like just the kind of thing that we would need. Didn't see the notice until very late, which is why we're just arriving, sort of like trying to grab the end of the train and get on before it leaves. Is this going to be repeated, or could it be repeated, or will we be able to see a replay somehow, somewhere?
Definitely, it's going to be repeated in the form of a cohort for everybody in rural communities that need access to this information. We're going to review the feedback on this webinar, obviously, and work with our amazing Jean Stolke. She doesn't like the word amazing, but I keep saying it because it's true, and I really mean it from my heart. So, and see what we can do about accommodating the requests from this audience. We know that this is something so much needed.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to a notice a week or two or three in advance of the next opportunity, and get that scheduled. I just saw this morning looking at my email a few minutes ago. Sounds like it was great, and I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Yes.
Thank you, Lisa and Jill.
Thank you.
Jill, and something that I am getting on email and on the chat is that people are having trouble logging in. As many people from rural America suffer from broadband and Wi-Fi connectivity, they are having trouble joining us live, but they are requesting the recorded version of the webinar.
Good. Wonderful. Great.
I'm not Sally Kane, by the way. I think that's because of the way that the link was distributed. There seem to be several of her here today.
That's right. That's right. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Jill. I just have a quick question. If I haven't received many grants as a human before, is it worth it to try to get some small change first to boost my standing? Or should I just go for the exactly what I want? Do you understand the question?
I do. And generally speaking, nobody's going to know what grants you've gotten in the past. Often, like a state agency may want to know if you've been a tax exempt organization for 1 year or 3 years, but rarely will you be asked what grants you've gotten. So I think you can think of that in terms of, the more in relation to the grant writing. Sometimes smaller grants are easier to write, not always though. So I would, aim high. Your experience in writing grants will be really useful in writing like government grants. Those are big and hard, and they take experience. But there are more and more foundations now, even bigger foundations, giving larger amounts of money and making the application process simpler. So I think 15 years ago, I would have said, yes, definitely start with small ones and build. But because the grant landscape is changing and barriers are being reduced to the process, I would say you can aim high. You can jump into, a big foundation grant with no problem if you're prepared with time to, write a really solid grant, and you have good partnerships, and you have, a reasonable track record of practice, which is more important than how many grants you've written or received.
Cool, thanks.
And also, Jill, in a statement that really stand out for me is when you say, bring your reader with you in the message that you want to send. That is so important. I spent the entire 2021 attending webinars and conferences and summits with the government, SBIR, and all these agencies that put these wonderful programs together. And I heard so many comments about being discriminated because we're minorities, etc. And that made me wonder, is it really that it's all about discrimination, or the perception that we have that we are being discriminated, rather than being accountable for our own gaps? Right now, through this webinar, I identify that perhaps I'm not putting the right mindset, the right time, and the right resources around myself to support me to write the best proposal ever. And I am not being considered to the person who is reading my proposal.
Yeah, I would say, Luisa, that it is absolutely true that many grant structures, many grant systems are colonial white dominant systems, right? There is no getting around that. And many of those systems are seeking to change. So I think change is happening there. So I think absolutely there has been discrimination, and there still is discrimination in these systems. We know that, structural racism exists in all of these systems. So I do want to acknowledge that. And I see a lot of funders working to make change right now. And yeah, again, as I mentioned, it's not about style of writing, and sort of proficiency of writing as much as it is about proficiency in storytelling and clarity in communication when you're writing grants. So grant writing is absolutely a skill. It definitely is a skill. But anybody can approach it. Anybody with any experience can approach it.
That is wonderful.
Is there any kind of a shift in terms of grant writing and proposal sending, where you tell the story with video rather than just in a paper narrative? Is that helpful, or is it being accepted by grant funders more and more?
More and more. Yeah, the Kellogg Foundation just did a huge call for proposals, which I don't know if they've been funded yet, for major equity projects. They were $20 million equity grants. And there was a short sort of pre-proposal with short answers and a required video. So every applicant had to make a video in any way they want to just say their vision, you know, sort of say their plan. And people did it. I saw a lot of them. People did it in a lot of different ways. So that is more and more common, that video submissions are less often required, like Kellogg did require, and more often invited. So you can choose a written format or a video format.
Or both, I suppose.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, maybe that's a whole nother webinar.
That's right. Yeah.
Jill, I have a quick question about thinking about deadlines. I know during your presentation, you mentioned putting like 10 days in advance, but in general, when you're just looking at grants, period, like what is a reasonable time frame to successfully write a grant?
That's such a good question, Olivia. And they are so varied. So, you know, for instance, for the arts and medicine program in which you work, the state grant that comes every year, that's a grant that as a state arts council grant. That entity is pretty clear that that's a 30 to 40 hour undertaking, you know, of somebody's time or of collective time. But, you know, I hesitate to even scale around time because the time we each take to write is so varied. The time we take to think is so varied. So I would say what's important in that question is that it's significant time, right? It's not something, you know, and I didn't say this, and thank you for prompting me to say this. If you see a grant that's due in 3 days, don't do it. Don't think, oh, I can reformat a grant I wrote last year, you know, modify it. Or I can do this, I'll just, you know, I used to stay up all night in college and write a paper. Don't do it. Because you might, you know, the reviewers might remember you when you submit that not strong grant when you apply again the next year, and they'll have that first impression when they see your name on the application. So it'll reflect badly on your organization. It'll make you not like writing grants, right? So just make sure you have ample time and you have the ability to set a deadline for yourself at well ahead of the deadline. Otherwise, it's just not going to be fun and you're not going to want to come back to it. Right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mhm.
Yes, how many times we try to lie to ourselves, thinking that because we have data already in our systems, or we were involved in certain projects, or we had certain partners, that people are going to be able to respond to us to write recommendations letters in 2 days, for example. How many times we lie to ourselves? And again, I am not judging. It's just that I walk in your shoes. We are so busy with limited staff, and we don't have anybody to support us in this process. It's just part of what we're doing, but we are learning that we really, in order to be successful in these applications, we need to follow this process that starts with us. You know, being mindful with our needs first, so we can stimulate the uses of inspiration, the uses of inspiration and creativity, and that takes time.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I love that. Thank you, Luisa, for bringing that up again. I mean, just like you would approach your creative, you know, process if you're an artist, you know, making time and setting up those conditions in which you can be creative, well, and happy. This really can be an enjoyable, very satisfying experience. But the biggest barrier to that is not giving yourself time in which you can be well and happy in it.
Absolutely. Yes, we are approaching 1 p.m. and it has been an amazing time with you, Jill, and your wisdom and your sensitivity to share with us everything that you know about grant writing. We cannot be grateful enough for everything that you do. and will continue to do to support this mission. We are determined to really reduce the barriers to grant writing in rural communities and rural nonprofit organizations, Indian country, and to support minorities, many people who has had to learn English as a second language in this country, who struggle to come up with a right narrative. Those are barriers that we want to bring down, hopefully with the help of leaders like you, Jill, like you, Sally, and our friends in Native public media as well. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this genuine conversation and hope that we can repeat it very soon.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you all for being in conversation with me today, and go for it. Dive in, write a grant. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Luisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I'll be in touch over the weekend.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Does anybody has any questions? I see people staying put. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of the day and weekend. Be healthy and safe. Bye-bye.